You're a hero, Vark. All right. Good morning. It is fabulous to see all of you. Today, we are going to begin chapter 2. We finished with chapter 1, the famous debates about justice that Socrates has with Cephalus, with Polemarchus, and with Thrasymachus. And we saw on Tuesday that Socrates has a kind of begrudging victory. It's not a strong victory. It's not an absolute victory. It's a kind of begrudging victory over Thrasymachus, and that allows obviously the Republic, the dialogue, to continue, because it's only if Socrates can defeat, I use that word loosely, the three versions of the Homeric conception of justice. Justice is what you owe. Justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies. And justice is the advantage of the stronger. It's only if Socrates can kind of provide responses to both all three of those challenges and indicate how each one of them falls short, can the actual book continue? Because this is a dialogue about justice. Now, before we begin with chapter 2, I want to say something. I said this at the beginning when we started talking about chapter 1, and I just want to reiterate it too. It's also on the outline. It's on the bottom of the chapter 1 outline. And in addition to the fact that Socrates has been able to provide coherent and satisfying responses to the three versions of the Homeric conception of justice, it's also really important, and I think in a way deeply, deeply fascinating, that the chapter also serves to kind of illuminate this idea that while it is true that Socrates found responses, counterexamples, found responses for each of the accounts of justice. Justice is giving back what you owe. Justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies. And justice is the advantage of the stronger. What's really interesting about each one of those three is that while each one, as it was presented first by Cephalus, justice is giving back what you owe, and then justice is benefiting friends and harming enemies, as Polemarchus said, and then Thrasymachus famously said, justice is the advantage of the stronger. Each one of those, while each one of those on their own is not a satisfying account of justice, it's an incomplete account of justice, as Socrates and Plato are going to cultivate this new idea of justice. But in this fascinating way, each one of those accounts has something very important to do with justice, whatever it is, right? While each individual account on its own, justice is giving back what you owe. Justice is benefiting friends, harming enemies. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Well, each one of them on their own, as they were presented, are imperfect. They can't be what justice is. Each one of them contains something very important. Each one of those versions of justice contain a very important element of whatever this new account of justice will turn out to be for Plato, right? And so this is very interesting. While Socrates responded to each one of the accounts of justice, as we move towards this vision of what justice is, both in the soul and justice in the city, as we move towards the vision of Platonic justice, justice as a soul and justice in the city, we will see that each one of those accounts is important to ultimately the concept of justice, right? Even in the concept of justice that Plato will articulate, there's something really important about knowing what we owe. What do we owe ourselves, and what do we owe to the city? There's something really important in knowing who our friends are, and not just who our friends are, but what is legitimately good for people. There's something really powerful about that. That's related to Platonic justice. And ultimately, in this fascinating way, right, Thrasymachus's account that justice is kind of in this playful way related to the advantage of the stronger will find a kind of expression in Plato's vision of justice, and Plato's vision of justice in the soul, and Plato's vision of justice in the city. In fact, when we finally get to see, to look upon, to bear witness Plato's account of what justice in the soul is and what justice in the city is, we will see that justice, as Plato articulates it, is precisely that you and I know what we owe ourselves and what we owe the city. That we have a developed understanding of who our friends are and what's good for people in this philosophical and objective sense. And ultimately, we are just in our souls, and we're just in the city, because the strongest element, the ruling, I'll use the ruling element in the soul, and the ruling element in the city is the stronger presence. And in the soul, that's reason, right? Reason is, if when we are just in the soul, and I'm a little ahead of myself, I understand that. We'll get to this, I promise you. But on Plato's account, when we are just in our soul, right, our soul knows what each part of the soul owes the others. Our soul knows who our friends are, and our soul knows who the strongest and the most ruling element in the soul is, and it's reason. Right? And when we talk about justice in the city, it will be the same thing. Justice will be the fact that the strongest part of the city, the ruling part, the philosopher kings, rule. So two things happened in chapter 1. One, we saw the specific individual claims of justice that were part of this kind of broader Homeric account of justice. Justice is giving back what you owe. Justice is benefiting friends, harming enemies, and justice is the advantage of the stronger. Now, while each one of those was defeated, so to speak, right? Each one, there is something intuitive about each one, and each one has something important to contribute. Each one has something important to contribute to this overall account of justice that Plato will articulate in the soul, and that Plato will articulate in the city. Okay, so while the claims to justice from Cephalus and Polemarchus and Thrasymachus have been defeated, right? The kind of the theme and the spirit of each one will find a rearticulation, a reimagination in a Platonic concept of justice for both the soul and justice for the city. Does that make sense? Do you guys follow that? Yep, love you. All right, so let's do this. Now, so chapter 2 starts. And as I said a few minutes ago, chapter 2 is really where most of the work for the final, where most of the intellectual work for us is going to take place, is really chapter 2. This is wild, man. This is a wild journey. All right. And so chapter 2 begins in this brilliantly narrative way by Plato. Plato was a great writer. And the context of this is that Socrates, at the end of chapter 1, at the end of book 1, Socrates got Thrasymachus to blush, right? He kind of, Thrasymachus went, "Oh, you got me." He blushed with a kind of embarrassment, right? A kind of humility, right? When Euthyphro experienced his humility, Thrasymachus experiences a little humility. He blushes. Socrates got him in the argument, but again, it wasn't total victory by any stretch. But Thrasymachus blushes. And at that point, in the context, in the thematics of the vision, Socrates thinks he's done. Socrates thinks that he's done talking. They arrested him on his way back while he was leaving the festival with Glaucon. Adeimantus and Polemarchus and Thrasymachus and Niceratus arrested him and kind of forced him via this compromise to come back and have a talk, right? And so Socrates thinks the talk is done. There's been a little debate about justice. The most powerful and convincing argument for justice, Thrasymachus, has been kind of set down. Thrasymachus has blushed, and Socrates thinks he's done, right? Socrates thinks he can go home now, right? The conversation is done, the talking's done. Maybe Socrates can go home. And Plato writes at the beginning of book 2, now, Socrates says, this is Socrates speaking, now, when I had said this, and he's referring to Thrasymachus, now, when I had said this, I thought I was freed from argument. I thought I was done. But after all, as it seems, it was only a prelude. Turns out we were just getting started. In fact, there's 200 more pages to go. Turns out we were just getting started. For Glaucon, this is Socrates, for Glaucon, Plato's brother, for Glaucon is always most courageous in everything. Glaucon wants to learn. Glaucon, these young Athenian aristocrats, despite the fact that they are powerful, despite the fact that they have a life of pleasure, despite the fact that they have privilege, despite the fact that they have education, they're still hungry to learn. Glaucon is hungry to learn. And this is what Socrates is saying. For Glaucon is always most courageous in everything. And so he didn't accept Thrasymachus' giving up. So Glaucon thinks Thrasymachus gave up too easily, right? Because it was Socrates, it was kind of a weak victory, right? Glaucon wasn't satisfied with Socrates' response ultimately to Thrasymachus. And so Glaucon, did not accept Thrasymachus giving up so easily. And Glaucon said, Socrates, quote, Socrates, do you want to seem to persuade us, or truly to persuade us that it is in every way better to be just than unjust? And Socrates says, well, I would prefer to persuade you, of course. Well then, Glaucon said, you're not doing it. Right? Glaucon's unsatisfied, right? Tell me, is there in your opinion, Socrates, this is Glaucon, a kind of good, a kind of an account of justice is what he means. Tell me, is there in your opinion, a kind of good that we would choose to have, not because we desire its consequences, but because we delight in it for its own sake? So is there a kind of justice that we desire and cultivate for its own sake? Not because we get a good reputation from it, not because people think we're nice, not because we have a reputation for virtue. Is there an account of justice that we cultivate for its own sake, right? What is this justice, right? And Socrates says, well, I think there is. I think there is. And so Thrasymachus then says, well, look, I want you to tell me why it is good to be just. I want you to tell me, Socrates, why it is always good to be just. Well, I want you to tell me why being just is good in and of itself, right? Without consequences that would come from it, without having a reputation, without anything that one might receive from being known to be just. And Glaucon says, I want you to show me, to demonstrate why it is to be just. And Glaucon says, and he says on the next page, and he says, besides, right? Besides, I want you to tell this because he says, the line he uses on the next page, he says, every day I am talked to death by people like Thrasymachus, who are advocating being unjust. Right? This is what Glaucon says every day. All I hear all day long from people like Thrasymachus, from my wealthy, politically connected, privileged friends, all my aristocratic friends like Crito. Crito was going to break the law to save his friend. Right? All I hear every day, I'm talked to death is the phrase Glaucon uses. I love that. I'm talked to death by it. Right? He says, all day long, all I hear from my powerful, privileged, aristocratic, educated, wealthy, politically connected friends is why it is good to be unjust. That people are only just because they're afraid of being caught, or they think some good consequence will come from it. Right? And this is forgive me for being so stupidly dramatic. I'm sorry, you guys. But this is, I think this is just, again, one of the deepest moments in a book that's profoundly deep, because Glaucon is us, right? Glaucon isn't some fictional figure right now, right? He's not some fictional character, invented by Plato. He's not some waxed up dramatic persona, right? He's us. Right? Glaucon says to Socrates, all I hear from my rich, powerful, wealthy, politically connected, privileged friends is that doing justice, especially if you can get away with it, is preferable to being good. Why the fuck would I be good? Right? And in many ways, we're talked to death by this culture all the time. Right? In some ways, we're Glaucon. We hear in the media. We hear from corporate America. We hear from Lance Armstrong. We hear from Martha Stewart. We hear from Jamie Dimon at fucking Bank of America. We hear from Goldman Sachs. We hear all fucking day long in the media, from wealthy people, from famous athletes, from supermodels, from politicians and investment bankers, from Machiavelli. We hear all day long, nice guys finish last. Do what you can to succeed. Got to, if you can cheat and get away with it, fuck yeah. Do it. Just don't get caught. All right? We're Glaucon. Right now, you and I, this culture, we're Glaucon. And we're taught death every day. Get what you want. You've got the drip, you've got the sauce, you got the swagger, you got the bling, you got the money, you got the moxie, you got the roll. Get what you want. And if you have to cheat to get it, just be fucking smart about it. Don't get caught. Right? We're Glaucon. Right? Glaucon is saying to Socrates, hey, I wasn't really satisfied with what you said to Thrasymachus. I'm glad we're continuing. I'm not satisfied. And in fact, Glaucon lays it down. He says, look, I'm Plato's brother. I'm the third son of Ariston. Ariston is the most wealthy, powerful, politically connected aristocrat in the whole damn city of aristocrats. And Glaucon is saying, I can do what I want. If I decide. He's saying to Socrates, hey, if I decide to use my power, to use my political influence, to use my education, to use my aristocratic privilege, the world's mine. In fact, I can take the city. I can become a tyrant, Glaucon is saying. I can take the city. I can take the city. So tell me why I should be good. And in fact, Thrasymachus says, I'm going to restore Glaucon says, I'm going to restore Thrasymachus's argument. I'm going to make Thrasymachus's argument that doing injustice is preferable to being good. I'm going to restore, this is Glaucon, and this is on page 36 and 37. Glaucon says, I'm going to restore Thrasymachus's argument at the end of book 1, that doing injustice is preferable to justice, especially if you can get away with it. Glaucon says, I'm gonna restore that argument, and I'm gonna make it even stronger. Glaucon says, and this on page 37 is the famous introduction of the Ring of Gyges. All right, it's on page 37 where the famous Ring of Gyges discussion takes place. Right, and by the way, this is. So I'll say that in a second. So Glaucon tells a story in Greek mythology. It's called the myth of Gyges, the Ring of Gyges, right? And it's right in the middle of page 37, right? And Glaucon says, look, I want to make Thrasymachus's position that it's good to do injustice, that it's preferable to do injustice, right? Especially if you can't get caught, that no one in their right mind would ever be good. No one in their right mind, Glaucon says, would ever be good if they could do perfect injustice and never get caught. I want you, Socrates, to tell me why. If I can do perfect injustice and not get caught, why would I ever want to be good? Why would I ever want to be just? Right? And Glaucon says, and to strengthen that position, I'm going to tell the story of the myth of Gyges, the Ring of Gyges, right? And he recants the story in the middle of page 37. Apparently, there was this myth, this story in Greek mythology about a shepherd named Gyges, Gyges, Gyges. He's a shepherd, and he's out doing his shepherding thing. And there's an earthquake. It's a massive earthquake. And like there are in Greece, right? It's a very kind of volcanic and sort of unstable geography there, especially near the mountains. And there's a big earthquake, right? And the earth opens up, right? And there's Gyges, and he's stunned, and this big chasm in the earth opens up. And he looks into this big chasm, and he sees this massive wooden sarcophagus, massive wooden sarcophagus in the shape of a horse, right? It's a coffin, sarcophagus. It's massive. It's like it's bigger than this whole room. It's fucking huge. It's a wooden sarcophagus in the shape of a horse. Then the earthquake has opened up, and it's revealed it. And Gyges climbs down there, and he opens it, and he sees a giant. He's a mad big giant. He's dead. He's been buried. This is his burial, his sarcophagus. Earthquake has opened it up and revealed it. And Gyges kind of opens the sarcophagus, and he looks, and there's this giant. And he notices that the giant has a ring on, gold ring, silver ring, gold ring, big, beautiful ring. Right? And so Gyges kind of unethically is not cool to fucking steal from dead giants, but hey, this is the story. And so Gyges climbs down in there, and he takes the ring from the giant, and he puts it on. All right. Goes back to town, and there's a meeting of all the shepherds with their boss to report what's going on. And Gyges is standing there, and he's bored, and he's turning the collet of his ring. And when he turns it towards him, he disappears. When he turns it away, he appears. And he realizes this because he turns the collet towards him, he disappears, and all of his friends are still talking as if he's there, but they don't see him. All right, so anyway, the Ring of Gyges is the ring that allows Gyges to disappear, become invisible. And by the way, this is the origin of the Lord of the Rings. This is where Tolkien got it. Tolkien ripped off Plato. Tolkien plagiarized Plato. Right? Here it is. Right? The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Return of the King, all of that stuff, the billions and billions of dollars those movies made comes right from Plato. Tolkien ripped him off. So maybe plagiarism does pay, huh? Maybe a little cheating does play in Tolkien's case, huh? So anyways, so this is the famous myth of Gyges, the Ring of Gyges. And Thrasymachus says, okay, right? What if I had, Glaucon says, what if I had the Ring of Gyges? What if I have Plato's ring, Gyges' ring? And I can become invisible. And I can do whatever I want and not get caught, right? I can do perfect injustice. I can take what I want. I can make love to who I want. I can hassle my enemies. I can do whatever I want. I can have anything I want. I don't get caught. I can be unjust, perfectly unjust, and never get caught. And Glaucon says, I've got the Ring of Gyges. I want you to prove to me why it's good to be good. Why is it good to be just? Why would I still want to be just even if I have the Ring of Gyges? All right. And that starts the Great Republic rolling, right? This is the drama that gets the great dialogue going. So they back and forth a little bit about you know, the perfect person, the person who can do perfect injustice never being caught, while the really just guy apparently gets blamed for all sorts of terrible things. There's a little back and forth. And then on page 45, they agree to begin the search for justice, right? Because Glaucon wants to know why it's good to be just. He's talked to, he all he hears all day is why it's better to be unjust. And if you're rich and you're powerful and you're politically connected and you got privilege, then you should be unjust, right? And Glaucon's saying, I don't want to be that person. Turn my soul, right? This is, and by the way, this is Glaucon's naturally philosophical soul speaking to him. I want to be just, but I'm talked all damn day. I'm talked deaf by people, my friends and my family and Thrasymachus. Teach me, tell me why I should be just. And so this begins the famous search for justice. This is what keeps the dialogue going. And on page 45, right in the middle, and this is a kind of funny move, right? They say, okay, we've got to search for justice, right? Now we search for justice, right? And Socrates says, well, let's see. We accept the idea, Socrates says, that there's the justice of a person, right? We often say that person is just or not just, right? So we've got to search for justice in the person, right? And we also say that city is just or that city is unjust. Athens was unjust when they killed Socrates. All right, so we often speak about a just person, and we often speak about a just city. And we're going to search for justice, and we got to find justice in both. We got to find justice in the individual, and we've got to find justice in the city. All right? And so Socrates playfully says, well, where do we begin? Right? We got to find it in both places. And where do we begin? And Socrates says, well, let's see, right in the middle of page 45. I'll tell you, I said, Socrates, there is, we say, justice of one person, and there is surely justice of a whole city. And that, and certainly Adeimantus or Glaucon says, or Polemarchus, it doesn't say here. And Socrates says, well, is a city bigger? Right, this is kind of funny, right? Than a person, right? And he said, of course, that city's bigger than a person. And then Socrates says, so then, perhaps there would be more justice in the bigger, and it would be easier to observe. If you want, first we'll investigate what justice looks like in cities. First, we're going to investigate what justice looks like in cities. Then Then, once we do that, we'll go on to consider it in individuals, right? Right? And of course, already this is the beginning of the idea that the justice of the soul is a kind of mirror. It has the same structure and relationship of parts. It's a kind of a mirror to the justice of the city. Okay? The justice of the soul is in the human version of the justice of the city. Okay? And so that's the idea, right? The two accounts of justice, whatever justice is in the soul, it's the same. It's parts of the soul. It's not parts of the city, of course, but it's got the same structure and the relationships of the parts. So there's a direct connection between the justice of the city and the justice of the soul. All right, and so they're going to start with the city, right? And so at the beginning of 45. They begin to discuss the origins of cities. How is it that cities begin? Now, before we talk about this it's kind of a playful, simple city, even though it's metaphorically very profound, we should just say that, remember, Plato is the first. Socrates, but Plato is the first, because he writes it down and he conceives of a fully conceived metaphysics. Right? Plato is the first. Let's put a few things together here, because now we're going to see it. Right? Plato is the first, and this was on your midterms, right? Plato was the first to argue that some objective truth exists. And we can think about that objective truth across three, but in this case, we'll just focus on two fundamental categories. There's an objective truth about essential concepts like justice, right? We're looking for justice right now. We're looking for it. We're looking for some evidence of this objective idea, this objective account of justice as a concept, right? We're going to start that look. We're going to start looking for evidence of it. How do we see it? Is there evidence of it? And two, the second major element of the objective truth that was part of this first moment of metaphysical philosophy is Plato's argument that there's something objectively true about human nature. Right? There's something objectively true about human nature. There are a set of characteristics that all human beings possess, which make them human beings, right? By virtue of being a human being, all people, no matter ethnicity or race or gender or tribal associations or any of those things, right? There's an objective truth. There's an objective set of characteristics that all human beings, by virtue of being human beings, possess. There's an objective truth to human nature. An objective truth to essential concepts like justice, and there's an objective truth to human nature. And of course, we saw what those three critical attributes are. The most important one is that human beings are rational, right? The three characteristics that constitutes the objective truth of human nature. First, human beings are rational. Reason is a special faculty unique to human beings that connects them with the ideas, with the truth, right? Two, it's not just that human beings are rational, but human beings have language. They speak, right? And it's not just that they speak about, things, they speak about important things, right? They use language to follow their ideas, to give meaning and definition and life to their ideas. So they're rational. We have language. We talk about important things. We debate about justice. We debate about how to live. We debate about courage. We debate about friendship. It's not just that we're thinking about it, we're talking about these things. And three, equally as important, as we will soon see, it's not just that we're rational, It's not that we're speaking about important things, but we also are political by nature. We live in cities, right? We are by nature political. We are by nature political creatures, right? By nature. So, though there's an objective truth for Plato to human nature, by virtue of being a human being, all human beings possess some rationality. No matter where you go in the world, you see people talking about justice. Now, whether they're talking about it well or poorly doesn't matter, right? Creon and Antigone were talking all about justice. They got it wrong. They had it wrong, but they were busy talking about it, right? So everywhere you go, you find people thinking and talking about important stuff. And those people are in cities. Human beings are by nature rational, linguistic, and political. Right? And by the way, this is the first time, again, this is expressed in Western civilization. In many ways, this is the origin of the Western world. Absolutely, this is it. Right? And so I remind you / bore you with that, because what we're now going to see is a very organic and kind of simplistic account of that idea. Right? We're going to see a very organic and simplistic version of this idea that there's an objective truth to human beings, that they are rational, that they speak, and they speak about justice, and they speak about courage, and they speak about friendship, and they live in cities, right? The kind of the cornerstone of Platonic political philosophy. And what these thinking, speaking, city-dwelling people are going to do is they're going to do two things. They're going to think about how to live well. How am I just in my soul? And how do we live well together? Where is there justice in the city? Right? Now, to begin that process, they go through, and this is the organic simple, they go through a kind of organic and simple kind of anthropology. Right? Because they're looking for justice. They're looking for justice in the city. So they have to talk about how cities begin. Right? And so he says, if we're going to look for it in a city, well then I said, at the bottom of page 45, Socrates says, well then I said, a city, as I believe, Socrates says, comes into being because each of us is not self-sufficient, but is in need of much. Do you believe there's another beginning to the founding of cities? No, Glaucon says. Now, okay, so this is first. So whatever cities are, ultimately, they come into being because human beings, by nature, are not self-sufficient. Human beings, by nature, aren't self-sufficient. In the sense, right, that no single person could ever do all the things a person would need to do in order to live well, right? No person could make his house, sew his clothes, make his shoes, grow his food, educate himself. No single person could ever do all the things you would have to do in order to live well, right? It takes a community of people to contribute in various ways to the doing of all the things that are required to live well. No single person can live well individually in this kind of original organic way, right? And that's what he means by not being self-sufficient. Okay, right? No person can build the house, bake the bread, create the shoes, do what you have to do, right? We are by nature not self-sufficient. So there's something in a kind of lack of self-sufficiency. And again, he's talking in the big sense, right? He's talking about material things, right? About manual material sort of things as well as intellectual things. And so by nature, we are not self-sufficient, and by nature, we are dependent on each other. By nature, we are dependent on each other, even at this most organic and basic level of the fulfilling of basic necessities. By nature, we are not self-sufficient, and by nature, we're dependent. And it's because by nature, we are not self-sufficient and dependent that the organic origins of the city begin. So the city is natural, right? The politics is natural because its origins drive out of natural insufficiency and natural dependency. Okay, so ultimately, when Plato is going to say politics is natural to us, he literally means it's natural to us because whatever politics is and whatever it becomes, it grows out of the natural condition of insufficiency and the natural condition of dependency. Politics is natural to human beings. Now, obviously, whatever becomes of cities is much more sophisticated than where we are now, but the origin of political life for human beings is natural because it's rooted in natural insufficiency, that's not self-sufficiency and dependency. Okay? All right. So the next line. So then, when one man takes on another for one need and another for another need, and since many things are needed, many men gather in one settlement as partners and helpers. To this common settlement, we give the name city, don't we? Okay, kind of simple, kind of organic. All right. 10 lines down, middle of the page. Now wait, Socrates said. Now wait, I said. How will the city be sufficient to provide for this much? Won't one man be a farmer, another be a house builder, and another still a weaver? Or shall we add to it a shoemaker or some other man who cares for the health of the body, that sort of stuff? And certainly, okay, all right, so we're going to need lots of people. There are lots of things that we require, material, economic, as well as kind of conceptual. There's lots of things we require for a city. And so we're going to have to bring in lots of people, right? Certainly. Right. Now Socrates says, what about this? Must each one of them put his work at the disposition of all in common? For example, must the farmer, one man, provide food for four, right? And so Socrates says, okay, so we need many things, and we're going to have to attract all these people who can do different things, right? And once we collect them, Socrates says, doesn't it make sense that the farmer grows the food, and only the food? And doesn't it make sense that the house builder builds all the houses? And doesn't it make sense? Again, very simple, very organic. I get it, but there's a metaphor here, right? And isn't it right that the person who makes shoes makes the shoes, and the person who bakes the bread, right? Because why would you want the guy who's really good at building the house spending time trying to bake bread, or spending time trying to make shoes, etc.? And you get the idea, right? So the city comes into being because we're not self-sufficient, we're dependent on each other, and we're dependent on people doing things that they're good at. And so we bring many people in, and it makes sense that people do what they're good at. And write this down, because this is important. It makes sense that people do what they're good at, right? And only that, and that they contribute that to the city. Now, we get some more insight to this at the bottom, right? Because doesn't it make sense that the person who's good at baking bread, or bakes the bread, or the person that's good at building a house builds a house? And we should arrange it that that's just what they do, because we don't want people being jacks of all trades and sucking at all of them, being terrible at all of them, right? And so this is the kind of the movement of the conversation. And finally, Socrates says at the bottom, he says to Adeimantus or Glaucon, he he says, you know, I was thinking, this is Socrates, the bottom of 46. I was thinking to myself when I was listening to you, Adamatus or Glaucon, I myself also had the thought, Socrates says, I myself also had the thought that when you spoke, that in the first place, here we go, each of us is naturally not quite like anyone else. Each of us is naturally not quite like anyone else, but rather differs in his nature. Different human beings, different men, are apt for the accomplishment of different jobs. Or isn't that your opinion? And Glaucon says, well, it is. Right? All right. So, critical moment here. We have just seen the idea, right? This Platonic, this metaphysical idea that there's not just that human beings possess a kind of an objectively common human nature. It's not just that human beings are rational and they speak and they live in cities, but it's also the case that human beings have naturally specific talents and aptitudes. Nature writes into our souls different types of talents and aptitudes. And by the way, this is something we hear all the time. This is very common to us. We often say, well, you know, that person was born to be a mathematician, or that person was born to be a baseball player, or that person was born to be a professor, or that person was born to be a movie maker, or that person was born to be an accountant. We hear that all the time. Right, and even we say to ourselves, I just have no talent for math. I just have no talent for philosophy. I just have no aptitude for whatever it is. We say this is not my nature. My nature, I'm good at baking, or I'm good at playing baseball, or I'm good at being a teacher, or I'm good at being whatever. Right, and here's the origin of this idea that nature writes specific talents, specific capacities into our souls. Nature kind of determines the truth. There's Nick Dungy shares an objective human nature with everyone else because we're all rational and we speak and we live in cities. But Nick Dungy is a little unlike Gabe, a little unlike Alvin, a little bit unlike Becerra, right? And we're all a little unlike each other because despite the fact that we share a common human nature, each one of us has specific natural aptitudes and abilities. And that, by the way, is the truth of Nick Dungy. Nick Dungy was born to teach, right? Or Mike Trout was born to play baseball. Right? And you can go on and on and on and on. Right? And so this is an important moment. In philosophy, in the history of philosophy, this is the origin of metaphysics. There's an objective truth about justice as an idea, as a concept, and we're searching for it. There's an objective truth about human nature. By virtue of being a human beings, all people share a set of characteristics. They're rational, they speak, they live in cities. And haven't you ever noticed that people are good at different things? And what we need to do as we're making this city, right? What we need to do as we're making this city is make sure two things happen. One, everybody figures out who the hell they are, right? Everybody has a responsibility. What do I owe to myself? I owe to myself to figure out what I'm good at. What's my nature? What's my aptitude? What's my talent? Am I a shoemaker? Am I a baker? Am I a farmer? Am I a teacher? Am I an accountant? Am I a baseball player? What am I? Right? It's when I, in this Platonic sense, and we're moving towards this vision of justice, what do I owe myself? What first do I owe to myself? I gotta know, one, that I'm rational, one, that I speak, one, that I live in cities, and two, I need to know what I do. Who am I? Nosce te ipsum in this now the Socratic sense. Know thyself. And one part of that nosce te ipsum, the know thyself, is knowing what my natural aptitude is. And find it, identify it, cultivate it, and share it. Figure out who the hell you are in terms of your natural aptitude and talents for certain things. Identify it. Cultivate it. Become good at it. So, as a member of a city, you can share it. Because in this playful, organic, simplistic, naive way, it's your job to be the baker. Or it's your job to be the farmers, your job to build the houses, your job to make the clothes. Again, very simple, very naive, I get it. But compelling in a weird way, especially as Plato is going to cultivate the argument. All right? So cities come into being because we can't do all the things individually we'd have to do to live well. We're not self-sufficient. We're dependent on each other. What are we dependent on each other for? Different types of skills and aptitudes and natural abilities that each of us in our uniqueness possesses. We become aware of that, we cultivate it, and we give it to the community. Right? Now, I'm a little ahead of the argument, but I want to say this right now. I want to ultimately what Plato is going to argue, especially at the level of the soul, especially at the level of the individual. What is justice at the level of the individual for Plato? It is literally a form of what we're talking about right now. Justice for the individual, for the soul, goes something like this. First recognize your nature. First recognize your nature. You're rational, you speak, you get in debates and arguments about important shit like justice, and we're social and political creatures. Okay? So we're by nature political. And if you look around, Socrates says, if you look around, you tend to see the fact, this fascinating phenomenon that people are really good at different things. Nature has given them specific talents. The Christians would say God gave you that talent, right? God made you different than me, different than Alvin, or me different than Gabe, or me different than Betzera, right? The Christians would talk like that, but for Plato, it's nature. It's kind of the objective conditions of nature. All right. Now, ultimately, what justice is going to look like, again, I'm ahead of myself a little bit, but we might as well talk about it since we're here, is figuring out, one, becoming aware that we have an objective nature, we're rational, we speak, we live in cities, and that our mind, if we activate it, gets us into contact with knowledge about essential concepts, but also too, on an individual level, coming to recognize who we are. Who am I? What are my natural talents? Right? And to put it in the language of owing, we were playing with the language of what do I owe earlier. What do I owe myself? What do I owe the city? Well, as we're going to see this, ultimately, what I owe myself is to figure out who I am. Nosce te ipsum, what are my talents? That's what I owe myself. And I further owe it to myself to cultivate them. And I further owe it to the city to share it with them. What do I owe? I owe it to myself to figure out who I am. What am I good at? What talent did nature write into my soul, to be playful with the language? All right. I need to spend my life cultivating that. And I need to share it. Now, the other side of that, right? And by the way, that's what Plato is going to call justice in this crude way. We're going to go there in the next week or two, but at a very basic level, that's what justice of the person is. I'm a just person. So I recognize my objective nature. I recognize my rationality, recognize that I live in cities with others, and I recognize that nature has inscribed a specific talent or aptitude in me. And I've figured it out. And I've cultivated it. And I'm sharing it. For Plato, that's a kind of simplistic, organic model of the just person. And the opposite would be true. I would be unjust on the individual level first. For Plato, I would be unjust if I had some idea that my talent was to be a teacher, but I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be a baseball player. My passion was to be a baseball player. I didn't want to be a teacher, right? I wanted to be a baseball player. And in this kind of organic and simplistic way, the argument would be if I didn't listen to my reason telling me what I'm good at and what I need to cultivate and ultimately what I need to share, if I wouldn't listen to that, and because someone told me follow your passions, right? Or I really strongly wanted to be a baseball player. I really wanted it. Emotionally, I wanted it. I was passionate about baseball. And if I had spent my life trying to be a baseball player, semi-blind, I'm physically not an impressive specimen, right? My chances of hitting 100-mile fucking fastball are zero. So I would have spent my life whiffing, sitting on the bench playing for the Mudville Nine. Now, in the big scheme of this story that's being developed, I would be unjust to myself. I would actually, on Plato's account, I would actually be unjust to myself because I'm violating my own nature. And because I never became the famous teacher that I ultimately have become, you can laugh. I would have robbed. I would have denied the city what I should have given it. My talent to do something that the city needs, educate young people or build houses, whatever it was. So this is a critical moment, right? In this kind of development, because we're looking for justice in the city. Okay, so how do cities begin? We're not self-sufficient. We're dependent on each other. No single person can do everything one needs to live well. Okay, so we need lots of people. And haven't you ever noticed that people are good at different things? So let's make sure we find the people who know what the hell they're good at and they cultivate it. One, so they're doing what they're supposed to be doing according to nature. The baker's not trying to play fucking baseball, right? And because the baker's baking and not trying to play baseball, the fucking city has bread. Pardon my language. That's the argument here. So again, what do I owe? I owe it to myself to figure out who the hell I am in terms of to become aware of who I am in the broader sense and to figure out who I am in terms of specific nature. And then it's my obligation. What do I owe myself? What's my moral obligation to myself? To cultivate that, become the best damn teacher or the best damn baker or the best damn mathematician that I can be. So I can contribute because we live together in cities. All right. It wouldn't be strange, bottom of 46, I said. I myself also had the thought when you spoke that in the first place, each of us is naturally not quite like the other. but rather differs in our nature. Different men are apt for the accomplishment of different jobs. Isn't that your opinion? And Glaucon says, yeah, you're right. I see that. You're right. I see that all the time. You're right. And what about this? Socrates says, who would do a finer job? Who would do a better job? One man practicing many arts, or one man, one art? Well, of course, Glaucon says, one man, one art. And then 6 lines down. So, on this basis, Socrates says, each thing becomes more plentiful, finer, and easier. When one man, exempt from other tasks, does one thing according to his nature. And at the critical moment, I figure out what I'm supposed to do, and I cultivate it. Now then, Adeimantus, there's need of more citizens than 4 for the provisions of which we were speaking. For the farmer, as it seems, won't make his own plow himself, if it's going to be a good plow, or his hoe, or the rest of the tools for farming. And the house builder won't either, and he needs many too. And it will be the same with the weaver and the shoemaker. And that's right, Adeimantus says. So carpenters, smiths, and many other craftsmen of this sort become partners in our little city, making it into a throng, most certainly. But it wouldn't be very big yet if we added cowherds and shepherds and other kinds of herdmen, so that the farmers would have oxen and stuff. And so this goes on. Bottom of the page. Then there will also be a need for still other people who bring to it what's needed from other cities, tradesmen. Okay. And this goes on for another page. And then on the top of page 49, Socrates says, on the top of page 49, Socrates says, perhaps what you say is fine, Socrates said. It really must be considered, and we mustn't back away. First, Socrates says, now we've built this little city, right? We've built this city. We got all the people who are doing the important things. Everybody's doing what he or she is supposed to, and we're producing all the important things. That's what's happening right here. We've brought in all the people that we need, and all the people that we need are doing the things nature has implanted in them. And this is our city. And Socrates says, well, let's look at what we've got here, Socrates says. It really must be considered, and we mustn't back away. First, let's consider what manner of life these people, so provided, will lead. Won't they make bread, wine, clothing, and shoes? And when they have built houses, they will work in the summer, for the most part naked and without shoes. And in the winter, adequately clothed and shod. For food, they will prepare barley and wheat flour. They will cook it and knead it, setting out noble loaves of bread and wheat on some reeds or clean leaves. Again, very organic, primitive, of course, but it's a metaphor. They will stretch out on rushes, on gathered branches or soft branches on rushes. They will stretch out on rushes strewn with yew and myrtle and feast themselves and their children. Afterwards, they will drink wine and, crowned with wreaths, sing of songs. Afterwards, and so they will and they will make love, so they will have sweet intercourse with one another and not produce children beyond their means, keeping an eye out against poverty or war. All right. We will stop there, and we will pick this up on Tuesday. Have a fabulous weekend, all of you. I hope you're well, and we'll see you Tuesday.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep. Much love, you guys.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep.